We're good to begin. Welcome everyone. Welcome to another demo session. Today it's all about GitHub Copilot. Just want to give you a welcome to all the attendees and to the guest speakers as well. Thanks for joining in today. I'm Nuno. I'm product manager here at Chilling, and just want to explain a little bit about the session today. The focus, of course, will be on GitHub Copilot. We're going to explore this AI-powered code assistant that is revolutionizing the way that we write and understand code. So we're very welcome to have Marcio and Pedro as well from GitHub Copilot. Marcio will give you a presentation about GitHub, explain a little bit about its functionalities. Then we're going to jump into Marcelo Sousa, CEO of Reviewpad, who's also going to give us his use case of GitHub Copilot in his company. And last, we're going to also have, of course, Humberto Ayres Pereira, the CEO of Rose, who also going to give us a presentation and explain about the use cases of GitHub Copilot for Rose. At the end, we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Feel free to drop in some questions during our conversation. And of course, at the end, we'll also have some space if you want to ask the question directly to our speakers. So let's begin. First, I also wanted to remind you all that as portfolio companies of Schilling, you do have access to GitHub Copilot through Microsoft. And so you have the access to the Microsoft Founders Hub. So that enables you to get access to GitHub Enterprise and have licenses that you can use to explore the tool that we're going to use today. So feel free to reach out and check the Founders Portal. You will have more information there about Microsoft and the offers that they give. So that aside, let's begin. Let's jump the ball to GitHub Copilot and Marcio to begin his quick presentation. Go ahead, Marcio.
Yeah, thank you. No, just one word on my side. To quickly present myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Pedro. I'm one of the few Portuguese working in GitHub, and actually I cover the whole Portuguese market. So I just wanted to point out that if you need anything from GitHub in the future, you can take my contacts and I can help you out. And allow me quickly to pass forward to Marcio, our solutions engineer. We worked together already for almost 2 years. And Marcio, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nuno. Thanks, Pedro. Hi, everyone. So in my role in GitHub, I mainly help customers to get the most of GitHub products, Copilot included. So I'm going to share a short presentation with you. Maybe we're going to touch some code, just share a bit how Copilot works. And we're happy also to discuss after if you have questions about the future, what's coming next. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'll share this presentation, be very short. So I just want to introduce a bit about Copilot and some use cases that I see customers using it. So Copilot, as you might be familiar with already, it's an auto-completing tool. It's an AI pair programmer that functions based on an OpenAI Codex model that feeds its algorithm to generate suggestions. And what I see customers mainly using is with 3 main use cases, which is coding faster. So the way to code faster is Copilot is going to autocomplete while developers actually is doing their work on daily basis. There also is very useful tool to generate data, to fix bugs and generate tests, and also to learn new code. So me, for example, I have a background of Java and .NET development, but recently I also do some demos in JavaScript, including one demo that I'm going to do right after there's this meeting called Summerfest for GitHub, which is going to be mainly JavaScript code, which I never touched until last week. Now I'm able to present that thanks to Copilot. So that's quite fascinating because it makes your product reach faster into the market. And that's the thing that Copilot can be very useful for you for prototyping, right? So if you want to see Copilot in action, I want to show a quick demo. So I have a repository here on GitHub. And this repository is a very simple bookstore. So if I click here on production, I can see this bookstore running on Azure. So I have it deployed on Azure. And in this bookstore, a lot of features are missing, like add to carts not working, books all have the same price. all these books having, it's basically hard code in my database, etc. And what I'm going to check here in this repository is that there is an issue open of the product owner. It's saying, hey, we just checked with customers here, and they're telling us that we want to add, it needs a recommendation system. We want to rate our books. We want the customers to see actually how interesting is each book. So one way of coding that is, let me put the hat of developer now. I open this code in a code spaces. Here we go, I have a code spaces. I'm going to open, if you're not familiar with code spaces, it's basically a development environment that I can create from within GitHub. And Copilot is going to work from within the IDE. So it really doesn't matter where the code is, if it's on GitHub or not. What matters is that the developers that are using Copilot, they have the plugin installed in the IDE, and they have a GitHub account that has either Copilot for individuals subscription or Copilot for business, which is the best for your business actually, because it comes also with the security controls. So here I see here that after my code has opened, I have GitHub Copilot installed. I also have Copilot Chat, which I'm not going to touch, but that's the future of Copilot, which is kind of ChatGPT integrated with the IDE into for developers to use it as a chatting tool. But here we are going to use, like, say, the autocomplete Copilot version. So what I'm going to do, let's say I want to do a modification to this code. We're not going to code everything, of course, but just to show a bit how it works. So I see Copilot's running down here. And the first thing that we need to change in this code, if I want to change this code, is actually to start changing the model. So if you have a development background, you understand a bit, it's basically MVC model. So I have to change the model, the view, and the controller. So the moment I start typing, you see that there is some grayed out text that's basically Copilot making a suggestion. So there is a background, there's a context that's provided to Copilot, provided in an encrypted fashion because this data is transmitted securely. This data of your code is never stored. We just read it in transit, we generate suggestions, and we return the suggestions to the IDE for the developer. So here it understands it's a book data model. It understands actually that I have some classes related to books. So it says, oh, I think I know what you want. You want to create an ISBN field here because you don't have that. Because ISBN, if you're not familiar with, it's the identifier for books, right? The internationally recognized. But that's not what I want. I want to add something like rating, right? Because I want to add a rating of books that, let's say, that goes from 0 to 5, like 0 to 5 stars. So if I put int here, then Copilot again is suggesting ID to me, which is not what I want. I want something like rating. So this is one way of using Copilot. Developers typing and it goes and comes with suggestions. So if I come here to a place in my code, let's say here, once I built this rating, Copilot already knows, I didn't give any instruction. It already knows that I need to update my constructor because now there is a new field that I added. So I just press tab and here we go. The code is ready to me. I don't need actually to change that. Other way of using Copilot, let's say I go to another class here and there are many books that are being added here. So these are the books that you can see here. So let's say I want to add more data here. So I can be a bit more intentional with Copilot and say, hey, add a famous book, or even let's say in Portuguese, we can say something like, let's keep in English, a famous book from Fernando Pessoa, for example. And Copilot is going to grab this context and going to add a book exactly as I want. Other ways of being more intentional with Copilot that I like a lot is like being very specific what you want to do. So let's say you want to actually, add a method to get a book by title, for example, and I press return. And here Copilot is going to suggest me the full implementation. So it understands that I have this get sample books static list here, and probably I want to grab the books from here. So that's how it gets this context. So let's say I want to be a bit more specific even. So let's say I want to public static book get a book that starts with R, something like that, right? So what I'm doing here, I'm being very specific, very intentional what I want because I'm specifying the name of the method with the algorithm that I want. And here, for example, it gives me a good result, but when I press Ctrl return, it's going even to synthesize more options for me. So I can see here that there are many solutions, different suggestions that Copilot is going to build and present to me here. If it doesn't, here we go. So there are many different suggestions that I can choose from. In this case, the first one would be the best. Awesome. So I'm very short on time. I just want to show you a bit how Copilot works in this sense. So back to the presentation, just to summarize what you have seen. So summarizing like how Copilot works as a service. So Copilot is going to work from the IDE, as I mentioned before. You have like the context being grabbed from your code. This context is sent to Copilot as a service. And Copilot is going to generate the suggestions, provide that to the user. And then users is going to be able to discriminate if that result makes sense or not to them. Your data is not stored. Private code is not stored. The code that's generated by Copilot is fresh code, is new code. And the code that's generated for you belongs to you. Or to any license that applies to a repository is going to apply to this new code that's generated. But then you're going to say, hey, Marcio, I can see here it's saying that it's going to improve suggestions. So are you going to use our code to train Copilot? So not at all. So when you actually have Copilot for Business, the telemetry is totally disabled. So there is no way for new code that's generated by Copilot train back Copilot model. What is going to happen is user behavior. User behavior data is what we're interested in. For example, you use ChatGPT and you sometimes put thumbs up and thumbs down on a response. So that's exactly what is happening here. So this is the feedback that we're going to grab back from users by acknowledging, hey, did the user accept that suggestion? Did the user modify that suggestion? It's going to tell Copilot if Copilot actually is doing a good service or not, generating that bit. And that's it. So today, the best way for companies for our customers that are using Copilot is use Copilot for Business, because there are this kind of security mechanism behind. You can also filter codes that match codes that exist on a public repo, for example. So it's a filter that is also used for your protection, in case you would like to enable that. And the Copilot is today is available for business, both for customers that have repositories in GitHub or not. But we still need, of course, some organization or enterprise account in GitHub, so you can actually manage your licenses and manage the users that use Copilot. That's it. I'm happy to take, I think I made 10 minutes. I'm happy to take any questions later, but for now, I'll just stop sharing. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marcio. Thanks for sharing also the privacy thing about Copilot and a real life example as well. Helps us a lot. So I'm gonna jump to you, Marcelo. Feel free to share your screen and share us a bit about how you're using it as Reviewpad. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So can you hear me well? Just double check.
Yeah,
everything.
perfect.
Perfect. So just a little bit of context. So, well, my name is Marcelo Sousa. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Reviewpad. So Reviewpad is a developer tool to help actually something very specific of GitHub. We are automating pull requests and helping developers don't suffer so much from the pain of having to review all the time code changes. And so we are a developer first company, a product company. And so we use GitHub a lot. And actually a little bit about my background, I have seen kind of inception of even other competitors of Copilot. Code.dota or Tab9. So for some of you that might know some competitors of Copilot. So Copilot was not the first tool to do kind of completions on IDEs. In fact, if you look at JetBrains and what they've been doing for the last 5-10 years, it was already kind of pretty cool. So we are not so many developers at Reviewpad. We are 4 people developing code on a daily basis. And the main reasons why we use the Copilot is actually, I'm just going to share my screen and show you like VS Code, so we can see it. And so the main reason why we actually use Copilot is to test automation. So what I mean by that is unit tests are quite boring to write. And so, for example, here we have a unit test on one of our functionalities. And with Copilot, it's quite simple to start generating some unit tests. So, there is this saying like Copilot take the wheel, right? So you can see it will try to do some new tests here. So you just click on tab. One thing that Copilot works quite well, and they were able to solve, is the latency issue. So essentially, when you're coding, you want to have latency typically below 200 milliseconds. And so actually it's pretty cool how smooth it is. So as I am typing, I actually see the completions on VS Code. And that's something that really kind of makes a difference for us, or made difference at the time we were testing it out. And so we can, continue doing things here. One thing that is kind of interesting is, so as you can see, sometimes Copilot comes up with code that doesn't make much sense. So what's happening here is that, so maybe I can go a little bit more in detail on what I think Copilot is doing. Of course, the details must be quite intricate. So what it does, it kind of makes, everyone knows about large language models nowadays, but basically it looks at the context of your code. So it's basically taking all the code before and building a kind of context to understand what code should produce now. The code that it builds on the context could be inside of this file, but actually Copilot is looking at all the workspace that you have on VS Code in this case. So, and that makes the experience quite nice because it makes it, in a way, able to reference types that don't live in this file itself, but live in other files in this code base. So, and that's kind of initially looks a little bit like magic, but once you kind of understand that it's doing that, it can be quite cool to see that. So the main use case for us is essentially getting faster developers. So code is quite verbose, even though we are mostly in Go and Rust. But if you're coding in Java, there's a lot of syntactic boilerplate, and so tools that can autocomplete that. I remember seeing people using macros on Emacs and stuff like that to kind of completely get boilerplate code out of the way. And that's typically how we use Copilot. So that's the first main use case. Some of the things that are quite also nice is the ability to get good variable names. So developers don't know sometimes how to write variable names or how to come up with variable names, and so Copilot typically helps with those kinds of naming conventions that can be quite helpful. There's a couple of features of Copilot, for example, so the ability to, from the code comments, to generate code. So so I typically put a code comment to kind of give an intention. So in the prompt, in a way, to say, okay, I want to generate tests with invalid param, for example, and then it's going to try and do the same thing as we were doing before, and now it's improving the code a little bit, and so that's one of the things. So some of the things that are not so nice is obviously hallucinations. So especially when you're using third-party integrations, you can start coming up with API calls that make no sense or that don't even exist. And so you need to be quite careful if you're doing kind of production code on what you're actually doing, because you can introduce, vulnerabilities quite, you can introduce vulnerabilities relatively easily. And sometimes, these are just small pieces of code, but we can go to some other ones. When you have, so it can start generating things that you actually don't care about or are hard to read. So that's when it's generating kind of just interfaces or API calls. But if you start generating like an actual big function, so let me just go to maybe one of those. Let's say this one here. So here there's a to-do. So it tries to also complement your code comments. Sometimes this is a little bit of blah, blah, so it's not very useful. So it's kind of like just a pair programmer. Well, it's a bit too strong, but it's just trying to help you essentially. So, and sometimes, as I said, it can generate code that it's a little bit harder to read, and that's, I think, what Marcio was telling before, was the ability to kind of get another suggestion. So that's, I think, are the most typical use cases that we use Copilot for. And there's, I think, to finalize, something that I think is quite nice is, indeed, if you're not familiar with the programming language, Copilot can be a kind of helper to, understand how things should be done, or even, just through comments, because I can just basically say what, as I said, the intention here, and then you start generating code that should look like, proper proper code. So some concerns are always the usual ones, which is, we don't know exactly, we don't use GitHub for business. We don't see, it's a little bit too expensive for us. What we do is we allow the developers individually to buy licenses. So actually I have to, based on the feedback from Marcio, I have to look at, what are the security constraints of that, because if we do get suggestions from proprietary code or code that which doesn't have a permissive license, that could be something serious for us. So yeah, looking forward to understand a little bit more that kind of discussion and also on the security side. So I hope that it gives you an idea of why we are using Reviewpad in our case.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Marcelo, for showcasing it. Next, let's jump into Humberto. Humberto, feel free to share your screen and tell us a bit about how you're using Copilot for rows.
Yes, I don't know if the screen is live.
Yeah,
I think so.
Good.
Yeah. So only a few people at Rose use GitHub Copilot, and I don't understand why. It makes no sense. Okay, everyone should be using it. I think that the price of this tool is a bargain for what it's offering, even with its limitations, which seem to be obvious for our team anyway. And so we use it in two different settings. One of them as a plugin to IntelliJ for the backend engineer, which uses it, a SQL engineer, for Java and Kotlin, and then as a front-end development tool, so for VS Code, for those working with JavaScript and React and all of that stuff. So we do see it helping multiple skills. The good and the amazing. The good part, at least as far as what our team tells us, is the code generation. It's pretty good for simple things, simple completions, mostly because it saves a lot of time searching and it fetches variable names and all of that kind of stuff, which really is useful. The code isn't perfect according to the team, and it takes actually a long time for it to be useful in our mathematical use case, which is building a spreadsheet. So frequently when they use it, the code just doesn't do what they asked it to do. But it's nonetheless an amazing boilerplate for that. What the team really likes is the documentation side, right? And it follows from Marcelo's comment that it fetches documentation even if it is in different documents. So if he knows that there is a relevant documentation, it doesn't create new text. It just points to that documentation, and the team really finds this genius, and we're really appreciative of this. So this multi-file context is pretty amazing. Saves a lot of time writing and searching for things that you don't really have to switch context, etc.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was just gonna say you're sharing the whole screen. I don't know if you want to maybe share just the
Okay. Maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, perfect. I think we're seeing it better.
Yeah. And for the future and the improvements which I ask is that some suggestions are or seem to be in our team's opinion direct GitHub and Stack Overflow types of completions, like very instruction-based fixed things. The generation part does not seem flexible enough in our particular context of building a spreadsheet. So many times you need something that does a mathematical operation or transformation, which it does not understand and does not give the right context. The text generation, we also tried a bunch for that, and it wasn't good for our setup. They feel like this maybe is a limitation of the IntelliJ plugin that may not have the full thing or may not deal well with this thing, but nonetheless, tried it and we couldn't really use it. And sometimes it felt like the starting new projects asking ChatGPT was directly superior. This was kind of like a flip, a coin toss, right? And sometimes GitHub was superior, but sometimes ChatGPT was still superior in generating from blank answers. And then they said, seems like GitHub has Copilot X, and and we should all get access to it. Why don't we have access? So this is like, the team seems to be excited about this future, and they're actually looking forward to it. I think that we are, in this current setting, we are very much looking forward. And that's it. Like, we actually use this thing to build features within roles as a bit derivative. So we use AI that we implement inside our products to then build more AI features. It's a bit not directly GitHub thing, but nonetheless, this is amazing to see. I'll actually look forward to the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Humberto. Thanks for showcasing it. Marcio, I don't know if you want to touch on any of the points that both Marcelo and Humberto said, or if you want to add anything.
Specifically, the access to GitHub X, the Copilot X. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, that's a good question. So today, what we say Copilot X, we consider that just a vision, but we have some products within this vision, which is Copilot Chat, Copilot for Docs, and Copilot for pull requests. This doc, I'm going to share that with you, shows a bit more about that. Probably you're familiar with that. Today, in terms of timeline, we don't really have like a date. We are taking customers into technical preview, but we still don't have, so nobody indeed has access today to Copilot Chat, for example, which is one of the products that are coming soon. But Pedro for sure can help you to get you on that list. Also, we have a link to access that white list. I'm not sure if I have it here. Let me take a look. For example, Copilot. I'm going to share with you a link that you can use to keep like up to date with the innovation that's doing. We have a GitHub R&D team, which is called GitHub Next, which is taking care of most of the innovation that is coming with Copilot. And here you can see on this page, I'm sharing here in the chat, all the projects that should be coming next. And for the link for the technical preview, I'm going to share here on the chat. Actually, this one should be good for you. So I would recommend subscribe to that and keep an eye on that. And as soon, of course, as we have news, we'll make sure that you'll be able to have access to that.
Very good. Thanks, Marcio.
Yeah, you can ask the question.
Go ahead, John.
Did anyone use either Copilot or some other ChatGPT to generate architecture documentation in some way or form?
Which aspects of the architecture would be interesting?
In diagrams,
Yeah, we do have some diagrams. I'm not sure how public I can be about them, but we do have some diagrams about some aspects of how Copilot works. But what would be your main interest on these diagrams?
No, I'm going to point to a bunch of GitHub repos or GitLab repos and get Copilot to generate some diagrams of the architecture of the code that is there as a starting point.
To use Copilot to generate diagrams.
Yeah.
I think actually I have a colleague of mine that's going to perhaps do a demo about that soon.
Yeah, if you can drop the link, that would be
Yeah.
great.
He's going to be generating mermaid diagrams using Copilot chat. So it's this, actually it's just 1 hour from now, basically. It's a bit short, but short notice.
Yeah.
By the way, in the meantime, if there are any other questions, feel free to drop them.
So about what Marcelo said about data privacy, Copilot for individuals and Copilot for business. So there is this, the things that with Copilot for individuals, the telemetry, it can be enabled. And the telemetry means that the new snippets that are generated by Copilot, not your code, but new snippets, might be used to retrain the model. So with Copilot for business, there is a protection on that. So it means that there is no way to enable that. It's totally disabled. There is no way to make that enabled. But for individuals, if we have to instruct developers, you have to instruct developers to say, hey, disable that or keep that disabled. So make sure that this doesn't happen, especially when you're using your code here. The feature to actually filter public code that match some code that belongs to public repo, this can be used in both Copilot for individuals or for business. So this you should be able to, developers should be able to enable that. But again, you don't have the option to yourself as an administrator, for example, of the organization to enforce that policy, you see. You still rely on the developers enabling that or disabling that.
Right. But basically, if developers know, you can instruct developers to do the right, whatever
Absolutely.
right thing you, and then there'll be no difference between. It's just a question of permissions and scopes, right? That you get on business where you can control that. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Just to add to João's Graça's question, I don't think that Copilot was intended for do like document like entire code base architecture or even documentation, kind of like summarization. The context is quite shortened, so you need a lot more context to send to the LLM to be able to infer appropriate things. What you can probably do is like a micro like bottom up, like you can say, okay, I have all these components and then I can individually just summarize each of the components like with diagrams, and you can try to connect them at the higher level. But that doesn't seem to be out of the box. So I don't think there's like an out of the box solution there.
Cool. Thank you, Marcelo.
And Marcio, maybe you could expand a bit more on just the capabilities of Copilot to be learning and improving over time. I know Marcelo also talked a little bit about some of the vulnerabilities that still happen, or maybe related to API calls. Maybe you can expand just a little bit on it, that functionality.
Yeah, sure. So 2 aspects here. Let me go back to that slide, which is very handy. So there are actually, here we go. So there are actually, there is actually a proxy. So when you see here on this diagram, there is like a proxy here in between you and GitHub Copilot as a service. And this proxy is going to do 2 things. First, when your data comes, your context comes from your private code, it's going to filter out any personal data that might be in the code. We don't know, but might be personal data in the code. Maybe developers left some email addresses, names, things like that. So we're going to filter this out before it reaches Copilot as a service. this is going to be done. And after the suggestion is generated, so we're going to run the model on generating that suggestion. It's going to send back through this proxy. And this proxy, what's going to do now is going to look for certain vulnerabilities on the code. There is actually a good blog post that explains a bit more about that. But it's going to look for very generically, going to do some quality scans and going to look for vulnerabilities in the code that's generated. It's still not there where we want, because also we want to, we still believe that there should be certain tools that do exactly that work. We don't want to make Copilot services low either, so there's a compromise there. Can't do like a full assessment on the code always. So we're trying to find a good balance there, what we want to address at this moment. But we always recommend to use Copilot and treat the code generated Copilot as a code done by your developer. So we still need to run the standard quality assurance tools or SAST analysis, for example, etc. That's the main take on it.
Good. Okay. Very interesting. Maybe I want to ask just on the use cases, and maybe to Marcelo and Humberto, how has it been to implement these with the developer teams, and how has the workflow changed in terms of building products? Just wanted to hear a little bit more about it. If there were some challenges, how was it implementing this with teams?
Maybe I can go first. I think there is two types. Well, one problem that exists is if you hire very junior developers, and if they adopt this Copilot take the wheel mindset, then you're in for some troubles, because then they don't understand what, it's like they're literally copy pasting solutions from Stack Overflow. So you need to be, and then when things hit the pull request, you start asking questions about the code and they don't understand it. And then you start understanding that, yeah, they are just, just hacking around, like, babies trying to fix the electricity at home. So that's definitely something that you need to be careful in terms of managing. So it would be cool to actually have a kind of, how much of the pull request was generated by Copilot, because, GitHub should have that information itself. So it shouldn't be a big of a problem to, when you open a pull request, to just understand, okay, 95% of the code was generated by Copilots, just to kind of get an indication that, there's a lot of code here that was actually just, accepted. And so that's definitely one concern that we have, at least. But besides that, it's just, you see a little bit more speed. I think that more than speed, what you see is a little bit more developer happiness. So a lot of errors that were happening before are not happening now, like linting errors. So we are just improving the bar all the time nowadays, right? So I remember when we were coding on VI or even like Notepad almost, right? So there was like, you are on your own, and now we have a lot of tools, and I think just Copilot helps you like format the code in a way that it does help. So that's kind of the major things. I think that what Humberto said makes a lot of sense, which is the thing is so cheap anyway. Like there is really no reason why you shouldn't have it, because it's just, if it helps you like 5 minutes a day, at the end of the month, it should already kind of, it's definitely something that is useful, right? Why shouldn't you autocomplete stuff? Why should you type every single thing? That doesn't make much sense. So, we use IDs for a reason. So from a developer perspective, that makes a lot of sense. If I just may, like as a kind of follow-up, if we still have time, I understand that Codex was trained in Python code, or at least Python is a big deal. I wonder if Marcio has some data about, how Copilot kind of qualitative performs. I don't know if there's like benchmarks on different programming languages. So that might be one of the issues why Humberto was also kind of, mentioning that this team is not super happy, is that perhaps, Copilot is not, since the underlying model was trained in Python and going from Python to Java. I don't know exactly if you're doing stuff in Java, but it seems like it. If you're using IntelliJ, Humberto. So it might just be that the quality of results in Java is not as superior, like not as good as it is on some other programming languages. So I was just wondering if there was kind of any kind of data that Marcio could share with us in terms of, where Copilot really shines, and where it might not just shine just as a question of time, for them to improve the underlying model?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sadly, I don't have like benchmarks per language, but indeed, Python is one of the strong language, let's say, on that sense. I think even there was a blog post that we published about that.
Yeah. On the question, for us, clearly the challenge is organizational, right? How do we quickly explain to people what this can do and what kinds of scenarios? Because like this new prompt thing, because it does everything, it also does not offer guarantees. It's not a predictive and prescriptive technology that you can say it is going to solve X, right? It just isn't the case. And I think that data is the only solution, as we were seeing from Marcelo's questions. I think if there were some kind of statistics on what kinds of problems it solves better, even within Microsoft and GitHub, right? Like we end up using it for X% of the code and whatever. Some way that helps teams visualize, junior teams, senior teams visualize where they should have more confidence on using these. And then obviously maybe selling this part as an integrated experience inside GitHub itself, right? Like you have the code. It's like on the IDEs, I understand that Microsoft is not so willing to also start preloading GitHub, right? There would be a rebellion if you preload it directly. But maybe on GitHub you can have a little button, like make suggestions or whatever, and then people will be able to see exactly how good it is, right? But there's also a cold start problem here. That like, why just load yet another tool? Yeah, I think that the organizational problem is still the one to solve, I guess. And I think that the fact that also it is so inexpensive, maybe it's also it's not in its favor. If it was that good, why is it only costing $20? Like it should cost $100 per month and maybe be 20 times better, right? I think engineers in general, from my experience, have a love-hate relationship with costly things. Some of them they reject, and some of them they love. And the reason must be quality and must be also social proof, etc. And so I think the more you guys can have it, the more amazing products you can showcase of companies which are using specifically to generate code, specifically to do tests, specifically for A, B, and C, the better it's going to be. Then the last part of the question was also how we're using it to create things. To be honest, like the more we're using these types of solutions is actually to generate ideas and test them without engineering even. Like just the amount of shortcuts which we were able to take when developing new features, just by, for example, linking code to charts and stuff like that. I think this is where these solutions are really amazing. Yeah.
Thanks. No,
it's an amazing world,
point.
And thanks for coming from GitHub to give us a demo here. I think it's really important that GitHub shows their face, and there's people to match these skills, and this does not seem like just a corporate move. That there's actually people helping us.
Awesome, yeah.
Awesome.
And I think everyone is eager to the new developments that Copilot launches and the new features that are in development, as Marcio said. I think you can also check out some of the links that Marcio has posted here, so you can find more about it. I think that's it. I was checking if there are any further questions. If anyone wants to say anything, ask anything, let us know. Feel free to unplug the mic and ask the question. Yeah, Hector?
Excuse me. I'm Hector from Cargo 5 here. And my question, I wanted to hear a bit about the interaction of Copilot with like huge code bases, because one thing that it's like keeping me away from implementing it, maybe testing it in big code bases, is that I know the context is really important. So I don't know how it fares, because it's so tangled sometimes and it's so big. And sometimes there are projects you have to work on that conditions. You know you can't change the code. You have to work under that. So I want to hear about if you have implemented it with huge code bases, monolithic projects, how it fares.
Yeah, I don't have any data. Sorry, I will have to reply this one, and I got a drop because I have another event to attend. Yeah, we don't have. Well, actually, GitHub is a huge monolith with 1.5 million lines of code, and we get the context that's goes as far as Copilot needs to generate something useful for you, but we don't have like specific configuration for monoliths. The context today, what we keep is a bit open. It's basically the files that are open on your IDE. Also, some functions that are related to that file can be, especially if you're talking about use cases, about test cases. Sorry, but we don't have like specific configurations for monoliths. But based on the context, yeah, I would love to hear how it fares for you. Maybe you can send me an email, just let me know if you have any concerns. That applies to everyone. Sorry, I really got a drop because I have an event to present. Thanks so much. If you have any questions, feel always free to send me a hi, me or Pedro. We're happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Marcio.
Thanks
we'll
a lot.
sure to enable the conversation between you guys, and if anyone has any questions, we'll connect you both. Let us know if you have any questions. We're almost reaching our time. So let us know. Feel free to drop it in the chat if you want. I think no. So I guess it's our time to wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for Marcelo and Humberto for joining us today and showing us a bit of how you're using Copilots at your companies. Thank you, Pedro, Marcio, as well for explaining us a little more about it. And thank you for your time. They're sure to help you guys if you have any further questions. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll sure to also share the link to the session if someone wants to check it out later or send it to their teams. So yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great day and see you at the next demo session. Thank you. Bye-bye.